Hey everyone, welcome to the first long-form video on my channel. Today, we are going to be ranking every single Warhammer 40k faction by how cool they are in the lore. So that means books, codexes, etc. Not how well they play on the tabletop, or how cool their models look. So, starting off here, we have the Eldar, or the Craft World Eldari. So, I am really biased here, and this is a personal opinion video, so I will be letting that bias seep into my rankings here. The Eldar are my second favorite faction in Warhammer 40k. I think they're really cool, I love all of their designs, and I love their whole fallen empire, dying race motif that they have going on. However, I can't rank them any higher than A tier, which is where I'm going to put them, solely because I think that they're not one of the more creative factions in Warhammer 40k. I think there's a lot of super cool ideas in 40k that the Eldar don't really stand out enough as just being the space elves. While I do really like their designs, I can see why a lot of people might think they're more generic and why they're not one of the most popular models that are used on the tabletop. So next up we have the Grey Knights, which I don't know that much about. I know a lot about a lot of the factions on this list, but the Grey Knights are one of my lesser-known factions here. However, I think that they look really, really cool with their kind of unique armor for a Space Marine and their silver. I think that they really lend themselves to tabletop models, which may have been intentional or not, I don't know. But regardless, I think it's really hard to distinguish certain chapters or divisions of Space Marines without making them look not like a Space Marine. And I think that they really nailed it here with the Grey Knights design. I also think that it's really necessary to have a de facto Demon Hunter faction in Warhammer. So I am going to put the Grey Knights in... You know, I really like them. I think their designs are really cool. I'm going to put them in A tier. Alright, next up we have the Tyranids. So, the Tyranids are probably the galaxy's biggest threat. While that is just my personal opinion, I can see why that's a popular one in the community. The Tyranids have possibly consumed thousands of other galaxies, and they're here in the Milky Way galaxy, ready to tear it apart and eat every last piece of biomass. So, the Tyranids are really cool concept-wise, and I think that the hive mind is a really cool way to have these mindless kind of animals be a viable, strategical option in-game. So, I do like the Tyranids quite a bit, and I think that they are kind of the de facto alien in Warhammer 40k, and I think that the setting would be a lot worse without them. However, I think that they're kind of overused a lot in Warhammer video games and stuff like that, and I don't think that their designs do enough to stand out from just being the alien. I think that it's good that you can look at a Tyranid and tell exactly what it's gonna be and what they're gonna do in the setting, even if you don't know anything about Warhammer, but I do think that they're kind of generic as aliens go, and I would not rank them that high up, simply because, you know, if you've seen Alien and, you know, stuff like that, they kind of look like xenomorphs. They're kind of like the generic alien design. So, even though I do like them, and I think the concept is cool, which I will probably say about all of the factions are cool as sci-fi goes, I will be putting the Tyranids in B tier. Next up, the Adeptus Sororitas, or the Sisters of Battle. I really like the Adeptus Sororitas. I have an Engine of Redemption. It was one of the first models I ever painted. Therefore, it does not look very good. You can see that short on my channel if you want. But the Sisters of Battle are a really cool concept, and I think that they most represent Warhammer as a franchise out of all of the factions. I think that if I was recommending the most Warhammer faction to someone, I would probably say the Sororitas, because they are super zealous, but they have all of this high technology. But, for example, like, you've seen probably their organ tanks, or their monastery, like, drop pods. Everything about the Sisters of Battle is really cool, and you hear them being called nuns with guns a lot, and that's just, like, super badass. They're really cool. So, I'm gonna have to rank the Sororitas just off of pure coolness in S tier. So, yeah. First S tier of the video, Adeptus Sororitas. And I probably shouldn't have added this many tiers to this list here. I know it looks kind of unprofessional, that's because it is. But I'm pretty sure that most of the factions I'm not going to be able to stomach ranking them below C tier. So, it might be kind of a generic video. However, next up, Adeptus Custodes. So, I really, really like the paint Auric Armor Gold. But we're not going off of models here, and we're not going how they play. The Custodes are really cool. They are the bodyguards of the Emperor. There's only about, is there 100 Custodes? I'm not entirely sure. But the Custodes are the gene sons of the Emperor. They're like the most pure Space Marines, kind of. And they are insanely powerful. People say that one Custodes is worth an entire planet, which is probably true. So, I do really like their golden armor, and I actually think that their lances are really inspired with the bolter on the end. So, I would rank them around A tier. However, I do think that they're not used enough, and they're kind of just used a lot in the lore as like a force of nature to get something to happen. Like, they send a Custodes down to win a battle. Like, I don't think that they're used to their full potential in the lore, and so I am going to have to put them B tier. Because this isn't purely off design we're talking about here. If it was design, I'd put them probably A or S. But if we're going off of lore here, I think I'd put the Custodes in B. Okay, next up, Gene Stealer Colts. Now, this is a really tricky one, because I think this is like the improved Tyranids. Obviously, it's great that we have both, but I think that the idea of the Gene Stealer Colts is really cool, even if it is kind of derivative. What did I just say? Derivative of the whole alien generic thing, with humans slowly becoming more and more like Tyranids. However, I do think that it's a really cool concept, and that it can be used a lot in the more urban kind of hive city settings. And they're kind of a great villain, or even sometimes like protagonist, for books and codexes in the lore. However, I don't think that they're used enough. I don't think that the concept is fleshed out enough. They're basically just a smaller scale hive mind with less cool units in some cases. So while I do think it's super inspired and a super cool idea, I don't think that they're fleshed out enough in the lore for me to put them very high. So, kind of controversial, I am going to be putting the Gene Stealer Colts in C tier. And no shade to the Gene Stealer Colts players. I think that your models are really cool, and I wish that I saw them more when playing Warhammer. Alright, next up, the Necrons, or they used to be the Necron tier. The Necrons are really cool, and I really like their whole backstory with the War in Heaven, and, all of that jazz. So, the Necrons are kind of a generic robot design. The original models, in the first few editions, kind of looked a lot like the Terminator, if you guys have seen that movie. So, I do really like the Necrons, but so I like them in the lore. I think that the Necrons are kind of like a staple of Warhammer, and that they kind of hold up single-handedly a lot of the lore and a lot of the books. Obviously, their devices have been the catalyst for a lot of major events in the setting. If we're going off of design here, I actually don't like the Necrons' design that much. I think it's kind of bland. However, and also, their whole Egyptian thing, I think, is done better by the Thousand Suns. But, lore-wise, I think that they kind of single-handedly hold up quite a bit of the lore. And so I am going to be putting them A tier, lore-wise, solely because I think that they are incredibly important, and if the Necrons didn't exist, then Warhammer would be a lot less interesting as a setting. Alright, next up, the better robot boys, sorry, Necrons, the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Mechanicus are really cool as a sub-faction of the Imperium, because they're kind of their own, thing, they're kind of their own nation. They're separate from the Imperium, but the Imperium relies on them for all of their technology, and so they therefore let them worship their own religion, have their own laws, and kind of surpass a few of the minor laws that the Imperium has. So, the Adeptus Mechanicus also, I think it's really cool with AI, abominable intelligence, that they don't let anybody use AI in any of their stuff. So, the Adeptus Mechanicus are mostly just augmented humans, with a ton of augmentations and a ton of cybernetics, which is a lot cooler than the Necrons thing, and I think really fits 40k, and especially the Imperium, as a faction. So I also think that it's really cool that their main thing is not inventing stuff, but sending out ships to try and find their old blueprints and ancient technology so that they can start using it again. Because I think that really fits the whole collapse of humanity thing that happened, and I think it keeps any faction from being too powerful. I also really like their whole talking in robot voices and having, like, protocol and stuff, even if it is kind of a bit annoying. Like, if you played Rogue Trader, it's kind of annoying to have to sit through all of that dialogue and try and understand what they're saying, but I guess that might be intentional. So, because of their importance to the Imperium, and because of how just important they are as a faction, I'm also going to be putting them A tier with the Eldari, Grey Knights, and Necrons. Alright, next up, the Astra Militarum, or the Imperial Guard. So, the Imperial Guard is a really cool faction. Now, I've said a lot of stuff about the other factions in this video, saying that they're kind of generic, and that's why I'm not ranking them as high. But the Imperial Guard aren't just generic, they're cool because they're generic. The Imperial Guard, they're just normal humans. Like, most of their technology that they use, we could use today. I'm not saying, like, las guns and stuff, but most of the armor and equipment that they tend to use is stuff that we could probably build today in real life. And that really is cool in the setting, and they're used a lot kind of as, like, just, like, a punching bag by the other factions to show off how powerful they are. But regardless of how many guardsmen they lose, there's always more guardsmen to replace them. And they're kind of just the backbone of the Imperium. They hold everything up, and without them, I'm sure that all the Space Marine chapters would have a really hard time defending the planets of the Imperium. I also think that even if kind of generic, their uniforms are really cool, and I can tell that whoever designed them in the first place took a lot of time and was very careful when doing that, and I think that they turned out amazing. Plus, I know we're not talking about specifically the sub-factions here, but both the Cadians and the Guardsmen of Krieg are really cool. And while I don't think the Kriegsmen are as suicidal as everyone seems to think they are, I do think that their devotion and their kind of lack of sense of self is really cool and really fits Warhammer. And I do think that the Fall of Cadia was one of the most, if not the most, impactful moment in the entire lore. I think that the Fall of Cadia kind of set into motion most of the modern-day lore events. So I do think that because this is a lore importance video, and I have to stick to that, I am going to put the Astra Militarum in S tier. I think that they are a great faction on their own. I think their models are really cool. And most importantly, I think that a lot of the stuff that revolves around them has been super imperative to the lore. Alright, next up, Death Guard. S tier. S tier, immediately. Why won't it let me touch them? Okay, S tier. Alright, so, I'm not actually going to do that right away. I'm just going to explain. So, the Death Guard are my favorite faction. They are my chosen army. That's what I paint on my channel most of the time, even if I'm not amazing at it most of the time either. But I do think that the Death Guard are incredibly inspired. They are super cool, all of their designs. I think that it's kind of like an evolved concept of zombies and 40k, and I think that it's really cool to have like an undead faction other than the Necrons that represents zombies, even though they've evolved a lot from that, and they are super, super cool. So even though they are my favorite faction, they're not used to their full potential in the lore a lot of times. In case you haven't noticed, they're used as kind of like the baseline bad guys in a lot of Warhammer video games and books. I don't think that there's ever been like a full book that brings out the true potential of the Death Guard and focuses on the Death Guard as the main focus. I could be wrong, you guys can correct me on that in the comments. However, I do think that the Death Guard are cool enough on their own and just their concept to constitute putting them in A tier, if not S tier, which really pains me to do that. And the only reason I'm not putting them in S tier is because they're not used enough. I feel like that the Poxwalkers and stuff, like, for example, Warhammer 40k Darktide, obviously, the Servants of Nurgle are not fleshed out enough in that at all. So, I would totally rank them higher. But I'm pretty sure that until they get some more books of their own and until they're more fleshed out in the lore. I can't do that, unfortunately. Next up, Drukhari, the Dark Elves of Warhammer, some might say. So, the Drukhari are cool. They're kind of like the de facto emo faction. I think a lot of people play the Drukhari on tabletop, and I think that, like the Servants of Nurgle and the Death Guard, they're just used often as the bad guys in games and lore. So, I do think that their designs are really cool, but I think that they are more derivative of the Eldari, which, I mean, obviously, they're the same species, essentially. They're just subspecies. And I do think that their whole, even if it's really gruesome, their whole torture thing is really cool. They, like, the way it's described in the lore and, like, the whole homunculus thing they have going on with a lot of their, like, torturees, I guess you would say, is really cool, and I think that they're, like, just really, really scary and a really good bad guy. So while I have been saying that we need more points of view on some of these other ones, and not to just use them as bad guys, I do think that the Drukhari, I do think that the Drukhari are such a good bad guy that they do deserve to go in S tier lore-wise, purely. Not design-wise, I wouldn't rank them that high design-wise. Okay, next up, what some of you have been waiting for, probably a lot of you, actually, the Ultramarines. So, Ultramarines, I think they're cool. Yeah, they're pretty cool. So, the Ultramarines are the main faction in Warhammer, I would say. I don't think that's a stretch for most people. The Space Marines are kind of like when you think of Warhammer, you think of an Ultramarine. Most video games feature them as a protagonist of some kind. There's tons of books on them in the lore, and they get the most models consistently out of any faction in real life. So, while I do think that at this point a lot of people are just tired of hearing about them, without the Ultramarines, there just wouldn't be Warhammer. And I think that would be a very sad world to live in for all of us. So, because of their contributions to the lore, I am going to have to put Ultramarines S tier. Oh, also, Rabute Gilliman's pretty cool, so that contributes to their success here. Alright, next up, the Blood Angels, Sanguinius' Legion. So, Blood Angels are really cool as vampires in 40k, and I think it's why do I keep doing that? Okay, sorry guys. I think that it is especially cool that they are used as the good guys rather than villains in the 40k setting, because that's not typically how vampires are used in sci-fi and fantasy. So, I do think that the Red Thirst and, it's just a really cool concept, and I also am kind of going to be selfish here. Sanguinius is one of my favorite Primarchs, and I think that Sanguinius' death is incredibly important and is what makes the Blood Angels so cool. A lot of the legions could stand alone without their Primarch, but I feel like the Blood Angels rely heavily on Sanguinius to be as cool as they are. And because I'm ranking the factions and not the Primarchs, which I would like to do someday, let me know if you guys want to see a Primarch ranking, I am going to put the Blood Angels B tier. And also just because I feel like B tier is too empty. Sorry, Blood Angels. Alright. Next up, Death Guard. The Death Guard are pretty cool. I like the Death Guard quite a bit. So, the Death Guard, I haven't ever played against them or played them myself on the tabletop. However, I hear that they're kind of really versatile. I think that's like their whole thing, because they have members from pretty much every single Ultramarine chapter. And I do think that that's a really cool concept in the lore. I also really like their silver pauldrons. I think that looks really nice. And I think that it really helps them stand out from the rest. I think that looking at any of the black chapters, you could kind of not tell the difference. But if you're looking at a Deathwatch Marine, you can totally tell with the pauldron. So, they're also not used amazingly in lore, though. I do think that they could be used more so, and I do think that, like, a series of books following a group of Deathwatch Marines would be really cool, and I think someone should do that. So, because they're not used in the lore to what I think is their full potential at all, and because they are one of the many Space Marine chapters and not the coolest of them, I'm going to put them in B tier as well. I can't rank them above the Blood Angels because I would say that I like the Blood Angels more, even if I did kind of roast them a bit there. Next up, Harlequins. So I know the Harlequins are no longer a army that you can play in the tabletop as of 10th edition because, well, I don't actually know why, I guess just expenses, but I think the Harlequins are really cool. I think that they're probably the most creative sub-faction of Eldar, and I think that if they did still exist in 10th edition as a playable faction, I would probably have my own Harlequin army, to be honest here. I think they look really good. Actually, maybe I wouldn't. They look really, really hard to paint. Are they hard to paint? Somebody tell me in the comments. But they're not used in the lore pretty much, like, at all. I think that they're used, like, in a few books. I mean, obviously, they had their own codexes up until recently, but I don't think they're used nearly enough, and I think that their Eldari and Drukhari cousins are used much more. And I think that a book that takes place in the Webway or something like that could definitely flesh them out more, and I think that if more people started writing about them and, like, asking for more books about them, I think that that would be what might sway Games Workshop into bringing them back into the tabletop game. So, as of currently, because they're not used that much, I'm going to put them in C tier with the Genestealer cults. To be clear here, if we're going off of design, I would put them in S tier. I really like the design of the Harlequins personally. But I just can't do that in good faith, seeing as they don't exist in the tabletop anymore, and they're hardly ever used in the lore. Man, my throat's getting sore. I should have, like, done this in parts. Okay, sorry, I'm really unprofessional at this whole YouTube thing. Anyway, YouTube thing, why'd I say that, bro? Okay. Anyway, the Space Wolves. The Space Wolves are the werewolves, essentially, of 40k, and while I do think it would be cool if they could turn into actual wolves and do that, actually that would kind of ruin them, never mind. But I do think that they're really cool. I think that they're really good barbarians. I think they're, like, a good counterpart to the World Eaters as a loyalist legion, and I do think that they're used as much as I think they should be in the lore. I don't think that they're over or underused. I think they're appreciated exactly as much as they should be. And because of that, they're going in A tier, which is a very full category. I need to start ranking stuff lower. Next up, the Tau. So I know a lot of people don't like the Tau. The Tau stereotypes here, I mean, they're just fish people. Watercast are hot, and that's pretty much it. Fire Warrior, very unsuccessful video game back in the day. And they're not used in the lore as much as they could be, like I've said, for a lot of the factions. I do think that in recent years, people are coming around to them much more. I think that their, like, a bit of a redesign on their models was really a needed thing, and I think that it really helps them out, the way that they look now. So, I am gonna have to put the Tau, I think that, lore-wise, they're much more impactful than a lot of the factions that I've ranked lower. However, I don't think that people like them enough, or that they're just likable enough in general, for me to constitute putting them higher than B tier. And to be clear, I would put them in B tier above maybe some of those chapters right there, since they are a more major faction than just a sub-Imperium faction. But I am still going to put them in B tier regardless. Like, I guess I'd put them here in between these two Space Marine chapters and the Custodes. But I don't think it'll let me do that. Hey, it's me again. I just realized that I totally forgot to mention anything even remotely cool or important about the Tau when there's plenty of stuff I could have talked about. So I would just like to point out that it's pretty cool how the Tau were left alone for only 3,000 years after being a cave-dwelling, kind of Neanderthal-ish civilization, and in just that 3,000-year time gap, evolved to what they are today. That's very cool, and I can see them becoming much, much more powerful in the future if they continue to advance at that rate. And even though it is kind of lame in the 40k setting, I can see how some people think it's cool that they like incorporating other alien species into their culture, and I totally did not mention their subspecies, not subspecies, but, like, you know what I mean, the aliens that they have at all, like the Kroot, they're really cool, and I should have mentioned them. So, back to the video. Alright, next up, Imperial Knights. There's something undeniably cool as playing as giant mech suits on the tabletop, however expensive their models may be to collect, and however few you may have on the board at any time. And I do think that the Titans of the Imperium really showcase, like, the true might of humanity and really harken back to the dark age of technology that is mentioned so often in the lore. I think that they are kind of a staple of the Imperium, and that Titans are used a lot of times as big backdrops or centerpieces in the lore, and I think that that alone constitutes me putting the Imperial Knights lore-wise in A. So, I mean, I might rank them a bit lower than that. I'm not sure, but for now, I'm going to put them in A. And to be clear here, I know a lot about a lot of these factions. The Imperial Knights are not one of them. I do not know that much about the Imperial Knights. I just know about, Titans. I think Titans are cool, so I am going to put them in A, solely because of that. Now is my favorite Egyptian-inspired faction, the Thousand Suns. I think that the Thousand Suns are really cool as Psyker Space Marines, and I think their whole being made of dust and being kind of lifeless husk thing is kind of a really cool concept. I also think that they're probably better Chaos Marines as enemies in most Warhammer, games and lore. So, I really like... Whoa. Okay, whatever. I really like the Thousand Suns. I would say that out of all of the Chaos Marine factions, I would say that they are my second favorite. Obviously, Death Guard's the first. And because I don't like them as much as Death Guard, I am going to put them low A here. Yeah, I know A is getting so crowded, guys. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have added this many tiers. That was my fault. I thought I hate one faction enough to put it in F, but I don't think I can. I do think that also a reason that I'm putting them in A and not in S is because even though they are used to a good amount in the lore, they don't really have any characters, which is kind of a byproduct of them being lifeless husk most of the time. But I think they need, a really strong, good character other than, Magnus and the, all of the wizards they've got to kind of bring them up higher than that. Alright, next up, the Emperor's Children, Phoenicians. I really like the Phoenicians in real life, the ancient civilization. So, I originally, I was going to play the Emperor's Children, but I realized that I couldn't just play them because I liked the Phoenicians in real life. So, the Emperor's Children, they're pink. Pink is an amazing color. It's one of my favorite colors. So, I would rank them high just for that, their appearance of being pink. I would not rank them very high for their appearance on the tabletop. Those things are hideous. Probably the worst models that there are. But the Emperor's Children are a really cool faction lore-wise. Their whole drive for perfection, leading them down the path of joining Slaanesh is really cool. But I do think that they were kind of thrown in there and kind of like a on-the-spot idea that someone at Games Workshop had to give Slaanesh a legion. And I don't think that... I think that they could have been fleshed out more if they were given more time instead of rushing them out, especially their models, which, like I've said, are hideous. So I will rank them. I need something in one of the lower tiers. This is the worst one that we have for the rest of them. Okay, yeah, I'll rank Emperor's Children D. I'm so sorry, Emperor's Children's fan. I do think that they're pretty cool. I think all of the factions are cool. I think they might just be, my least favorite. Especially because we already have the Drukhari for debauchery and all that sort of thing. So, World Eaters. My sister plays a bit of Warhammer sometimes. This is her army, and she really likes them. I think it's solely because Khorne is the name of their god. However, I do think that the World Eaters are really cool. I like Angron not liking his own legion, and I do think that Angron's one of my favorite Primarchs, probably. I probably like him more than Mortarion, even though Mortarion is my Primarch, technically. I do think that the World Eaters are cool, but I do think that they're kind of just used as the de facto angry guys most of the time in the lore, which I guess is fine. I mean, lore-wise, they are just angry guys. I mean, there's nothing more to them. And I do think that out of all of them, I know I said the Drukhari are the best bad guys, but I do think out of all of them, the World Eaters are the best counterpart to the Ultramarines as good guys, bad guys go. So I am actually going to be putting the World Eaters in S tier, above my own faction, because I do think that we need just, the big red counterpart to the big blue Space Marines, and I do think that is exactly what they are, and they do it well, so I'm putting them in S. Okay, next up, the orcs. Who doesn't love the orcs? The orcs are awesome, man. Everybody loves the orcs. If I had to rank the orcs on pretty much anything about the orcs, I would put the orcs in S tier. And I think that the orcs serve the exact intended purpose as being comedic relief and also being the green tide in the lore. I think that they serve the exact purpose that they're meant to, and I think that there's nothing that they could have done to make the orcs better. The orcs are perfect. So the orcs are going to be going in S tier. I forgot to mention a few things about the orcs, about why they're cool and why I think they deserve S tier. First of which being that their collective conscience of the orcs making something that they all believe in happen and come true, regardless of how unlikely it is. That's really, really cool. I also think that the WOG is really cool, and that basically their impact on the lore by being one of the major parts of the war in heaven is deserving of them being an S tier. Next up, the Black Templars. The Black Templars are pretty cool. The Black Templars are like the Crusaders, kind of Warhammer, and I do think that it's cool that we have a counterpart to, like, the Crusades in real life. I know there was the Great Crusade, but I do think that it's cool that we still have remnants of the Great Crusade with the Black Templars. I do really like their whole religious symbology. That's not that word. I have no idea what I just said, but anyway, you know what I'm saying. And I do like their very, religious focus. I do think that they are kind of bland, design-wise. Like, if you just look at one of them, I don't think that you can really distinguish them that much from the other chapters. I think that, while they are the main chapter that wears black armor, I do think that they're really basic as a design. And I'm not saying, I do really like Sigismund. I think he's one of the best characters. So, I would rank them high for just that. But I'm not ranking characters or Primarchs, like I said. I am ranking factions based on lore. So, since they're not in the lore all that much, and since their appearance is kind of bland, in my opinion, I'm going to have to put them B. Next up, the... Oh, shoot. What are these guys called again? I know who these people are, of course. They're one of my favorites, actually, one of my favorite chapters. The Dark Angels. They're the Dark Angels, aren't they? Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But I really like these guys, the Dark Angels. Their Primarch, Rogel Dorn, is actually my favorite Primarch out of all of them. I think that he's really cool. And I love the whole medieval thing that they have going on. I think they really exemplify the mix of the two genres. And I think that they really stand out from a lot of the other Space Marine chapters that are in Warhammer 40k. So, because of that, I would put them in S tier, them being my favorite Space Marine chapter. However, I don't think they're used enough in the lore for me to do that, so A tier it is. Okay, third to last. We're getting close, guys. I'm gonna, actually, start bleeding from the throat after I'm done with this. I need to practice speaking more. But just the Chaos Space Marines, the good generic Chaos Space Marines. Now, they are kind of the direct counterpart to the Ultramarines. At least that's their intended purpose. But the World Eaters do that a lot better. And I think that all of the major Chaos Legions deviate off of the generic Chaos Space Marines just enough to make them cooler. So I'm going to put the Chaos Space Marines in C. I don't like them that much, especially with all of the other Chaos Space Marines that I think are much better. Now, next up, Leagues of Votann. Leagues of Votann, I mean, they kind of feel like just an excuse to put dwarves in Warhammer 40k. And I think that, I mean, they're not fleshed out enough from just being space dwarves. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Deep Rock Galactic, phenomenal game. And the Space Dwarves is just a good idea most of the time. But when that's not, the primary focus, I don't think that they're used or fleshed out enough, especially since they're not the comic relief, the orcs are, for them to be cool, really. That might be an unpopular opinion, but I don't think that the Leagues of Votann are very cool. So I'm going to put them down here in D with the Emperor's Children. I think I like them less than the Emperor's Children, if we're being honest here. I don't like them very much. All right, last but not least, we have the Inquisition. So, the Inquisition is pretty cool. I think that it is a driving force in a lot of the lore. I think that the whole Exterminatus thing is awesome. I mean, who doesn't think it's cool to have, Death Star level barrages on planets at will? And the Inquisitors are kind of, all-powerful in Warhammer. That's how they're talked about a lot. That's how a lot of even Marines see them. And the fact that just a plain old human can hold that much power in Warhammer is really cool. And they're the focus of a lot of lore, and sometimes the main characters of a lot of books set in the Warhammer universe. So I am going to have to put them in S tier, lore-wise. So, this is the completed tier list, guys. We have Sororitas, Astra Militarum, Drukhari, Ultramarines, World Eaters, Orcs, and Inquisition in S tier. A tier, we have Eldari, Grey Knights, Necrons, Adeptus Mechanicus, Death Guard, Space Wolves, Imperial Knights, Thousand Suns, and Dark Angels in A tier. B tier, we have the Tyranids, Adeptus Custodes, Blood Angels, Death Watch, Tau, and Black Templars. C tier, we have the Gene Stealer Cults, the Harlequins, and the Chaos Space Marines. And D tier, we have the Emperor's Children and the Leagues of Votann. So, do you guys think that I really messed this up? Do you guys think that I did a good job on this tier list? Whatever your opinions are, and whatever faction you may play, and whatever changes you think I should make sure to leave a comment telling me all about it. Thank you all for watching. If any of you got this far, thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one.